and then I will, I guess, email it out or something of that nature. So we are on record now in perpetuity. So anything you say can and will be held against you, right? Okay, so that's right. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I'm not putting it on the Facebook or anything like that. So let's begin with a brief prayer. And we should know this prayer. Almighty God, unto whom all hearts are open, all desires known, and from whom no secrets are hid, cleanse the thoughts of our hearts by the inspiration of thy Holy Spirit, that we may perfectly love thee and worthily magnify thy holy name. Through Christ our Lord. Amen. Amen. To sort of pick up where we left off, I just wanted to speak about, in summary, sort of some of the ideas that we talked about last week. I want to reiterate this evening that everything we read in the Bible is true. But if you have to understand it sort of in this way. Why do you think stained glass windows were originally in churches?
Why what?
Why were stained glass windows in churches, especially in medieval churches?
People couldn't
Does anyone-
read. So
Told the story, people couldn't read.
To keep out the evil spirits. I don't know.
Primarily, really to convey the stories to people,
Christ, yeah.
because people were not literate at that time. Now, the stories of the Bible, at least in my view, sort of, at least in the Old Testament, especially in Genesis, are similar. They convey the truth about us and God and how the world is and who God is to us in ways that can be understood. And as human beings, we understand stories well. That's how we process the world. We process it through stories and pictures. So there, behind the stories that we hear in the Old Testament, in particular in Genesis, is the truth of God's faithfulness to humankind in creating the world, and choosing the patriarchs and raising up a people, Israel, God's faithfulness, and humankind's faithfulness sometimes, and sometimes unfaithfulness to the God that created humankind. So it's God's faithfulness to humankind and humankind's faithfulness or unfaithfulness to God is the main theme of what we're reading about here. And so we pick up very much on that theme in the second half of the book of Genesis. The first half are those primeval stories about the creation and the fall and the flood and all that sort of stuff. And now we're getting into really specific characters in the Bible. You had big generalities to begin with, and now we have starting in chapter 12. We skipped over some, and that's okay because we can't read it all. You're certainly free to read it all, but for the purposes of what we're doing, trying to get the main highlights thematically from the Bible, we start in chapter 12 here. So chapter 12 begins with these lines, right? And the Lord said to Abram, "Go forth from your land and your birthplace and your father's house to the land I will show you." That really sets the scene. Go from where you are to where I want you to be. That seems to be a theme that resounds with us, doesn't it? And so what is this land that Abram is being called to go to? Where is it?
He doesn't know. God hasn't told him yet completely.
Well, take a look at verse 5. Canaan, yeah. The land of Canaan.
Which belongs to somebody else.
That's right. Because
It
it says in verse 6 and 7, the Canaanite was then in the land. So go to Canaan, to where the, Canaanites live. And that's the story, right? And so we will have that center, the theme of the land will be a theme throughout the Old Testament, the land, Haaretz, that's part of what's promised to Abraham and God's people. And you'll hear it repeated throughout the Old Testament. This is the promise. You have the land as one element of the promise that's made to Abraham. And then you have a brief interlude right here, starting in verse 10 to around verse 20. What happens? He's going with his wife and Lot to the land of Canaan, and in the meantime, what happens?
There's a famine,
yeah.
There's a famine, and where do they end up?
Egypt.
Does this sound familiar?
Yeah.
Right? We'll hear about Egypt again, but what happens in Egypt? We have this sort of interesting little story here.
Well, he told her not to say that he was his wife.
Mm-hmm.
She was his wife,
Mm-hmm.
because they would treat him terribly.
They'd kill him and take her. Yeah, basically, right?
So
Yeah,
he went as
Say
a
his
sister.
sister.
yeah,
Say you're my sister.
yeah. And then what happens after that?
Well, she is taken in as his wife.
Uh-huh.
in a dr-
Farah's wife.
and yes, sorry, and he oh, I forgot now.
Okay.
There's a plague on the king's
Yeah.
property at
Yeah.
home or castle.
This sound familiar?
Yes.
Yeah.
Plagues in Egypt.
Mhm.
They're trapped in Egypt. There's some plagues, and what happens?
King gets angry and somehow finds out that Sarah is Abraham's wife, and they end up escaping, which is fortunate. But and he wanted them out of the country. Get out of here!
Yeah.
Get out of here!
Yeah, he
Didn't
wants to know
Yeah.
why he did it. Why
Yeah.
didn't
Why-
you say
yeah.
that?
Yeah. So there's a plague. It doesn't say exactly what the plague
No,
is.
no.
He finds out that they're wife, and he kicks them out. Let
Mhm.
my people go. Right.
Right.
So I just want to point this out to you that in Genesis, throughout Genesis, you will have foreshadowing ahead of time to Exodus over and over again. And this is the reason why. Before Exodus, everything's foreshadowing to Exodus. And after Exodus, everything's recalling to mind Exodus. The center of the story of the entire Old Testament
Is Exodus.
is Exodus. Okay? So there you have the promise and all that. So there's foreshadowing right there. And so he escapes from Egypt. And then I assigned chapter 13, right? Yeah.
Mhm.
What happens in chapter 13? We skipped most of Sodom, but there's a little bit here.
Well, Lot, they get divided. Lot and
Lot,
he,
yeah, they go
they
separate
each
ways.
take, and he ended up in Sodom and Gomorrah. Gomorrah. Right.
Yeah.
And he doesn't know at the time that will eventually be inaugurated by God.
Yeah.
So Lot took the wrong avenue.
They divided the flocks.
Right.
Abram gets Canaan, and Lot gets these plains, right? And that includes Sodom and Gomorrah.
Right.
And so this is sort of the settling in the land a little bit right here in chapter 13. We're not
They
going to
do it harmoniously, which there's no fighting.
No.
They're very amicable. They do it peacefully,
Mhm.
considerate of each other.
And where do you see, the sort of divisions and wars that occur from now on, right? But chapter 13, and then I jumped ahead to 15. Okay, you can tell this is an important one because I've written quite a bit here. So what happens in chapter 15? This is think of faithfulness of God and faithfulness of humankind.
Well, it tells him he's gonna have a son.
Mm-hmm.
There's another covenant made.
Covenant.
Mm-hmm. And how is the covenant made? There's a ritual to it.
Circumcision.
Not here yet.
No,
Lamb.
The circumcision isn't the covenant itself, it's the sign of the covenant after the fact.
right.
This is the
Well, it's
actual
not-
ritual of the covenant. What happens?
Go out and multiply and fill the nations for the
The-
next 400 years.
That's the promise that he's
Right.
making.
You have to, there has to be a sacrifice.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah,
he has
the
them
lamb.
He
bring
does.
the I think we'll hear
It was a heifer.
a heifer, a goat, and a ram. each
Mhm.
3 years
Oh,
old,
shoot.
and a
Doves.
dove, along with a dove and a young pigeon.
Mhm. So the part of what's there's a promise made. Okay, this is the mechanism that you'll see for covenants in the Old Testament. God makes a promise. In this case, it will be you will inhabit the land, and you will be the father of many generations, right? And you'll have a son, and all that. That's the promise that's made, and the faithfulness, right, of Abraham, if Abram at this point is what's expected of him, right? And to seal the deal, there's always a sacrifice. Okay, and this will color our understanding of the New Testament too. There's always a sacrifice, and in this case, it's a heifer, a she goat, a turtle dove, and a young pigeon, right? Yeah.
Mhm.
Right.
They're sacrificed, and this is interesting. And clove them through the middle, and each set his part opposite the other, but the birds did not cleave. The carrion birds came on the carcasses, and Abram drove them off. So they're just lying on the ground, and the birds come and pick them up. As the sun was about to set, a deep slumber fell upon Abram, and now a great dark dread came falling upon him. And he said to Abram, this is important, know well that your seed shall be strangers in a land not theirs, and they shall be enslaved and afflicted 400 years. What's this foreshadowing?
Yes.
It's
absolutely.
foreshadowing slavery in Egypt and the Exodus. Okay, so even here, you have that foreshadowing of Exodus. And then you have the promise, you have the sacrifice, and on that day, this is chapter 15, verse 18, beginning at verse 18. On that day, the Lord made a covenant with Abraham, saying, to your seed I have given this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river, the river Euphrates, the Kenite and the Kenizzite and the Cadmonite and the Hittite and the Perizzite and the Rephaim and the Amorite and the Canaanite and the Girgashite and the Jebusite. So this is God promising to give Abram the land of Canaan, that happens to belong to these folks here. And you will
Are
hear
they Egyptians or what are they that own those lands?
they're all sorts of people, but they're mainly Semitic people,
groups,
just
okay.
like some of them still sort of exist, but you will hear these sort of names over and over again, and they always talk about the people of Israel coming into the land and overtaking these people, but they always seem to be there. They never seem to go away. They're conquered over and over again, right? You hear this talk about them basically being eliminated, but every book of the Bible
They're back.
brings them back. They're always there. They never go away. And so later on, you'll have all sorts of concerns about intermarriage and all that, but they never go away. They're always there in the midst. And so I signed. I didn't sign 16. No, 16, right? 16
Yes.
and 17. Okay. So this is Hagar and Ishmael. So can anyone summarize sort of what happens here of Hagar, the slave girl Hagar?
Well, Sarah didn't believe that she was going to ever have a child, so she gave her maidservant Hagar to her husband to have a son.
She's Egyptian. She's not Jewish.
Well, let's talk about this in a second.
She was Egyptian. So it was the Egyptian servant.
Egyptian slave girl Hagar, yes.
Right.
Yeah. So let's talk about Hagar and Ishmael for a second here. So what's the point of this story? It seems sort of a detour.
Well, she had a son.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hagar had a son, Isaac.
Ishmael.
Right. Generation off. Sorry.
That's okay. It's okay. Half brother of Isaac.
It was Abraham's son.
It is Abraham's son.
It's not Sarah and Abraham.
It's not Sarah and Abraham's son. It's It's the son of Hagar, the slave girl.
Right.
Right.
Um,
And Sarah gets mad.
Mhm. There's a-
Whips her, whips her.
She gets mad, but she was the one that said to do it.
That's right. She's the one who did it.
She gets jealous now.
Yeah.
Hagar was acting very haughty and superior now that
Yeah.
she's pregnant. She had felt like she's come up a rung or two, I guess, in
Well,
the
Sarah,
hierarchy of the
Yeah.
of the family.
treated her
Yeah.
like she was superior.
That's right. And so, what happens in 17?
Sarah
Well, he
wants
abandoned her.
Abraham to
She
get rid of
leaves.
her.
Get rid of her.
Yeah, he did.
Right.
And so,
Now, I have a question, Father. The ages. Someone once said because they were so close to the original Garden of Eden and so forth, that they lived much longer. And it's through the years of intermarriage and so forth, our lifespans have been diminished. Is that why they live to be so old?
certainly, some of the rabbis in the Talmud and the church fathers talk about that concept of the age of people in the primeval times being longer because they are closer to, let's say, the perfect form of man in
Right.
Eden or something like that. Over time, it
Sure.
dissipates, and that's not uncommon. You know, we could take that with a grain of salt, I think.
I always wondered whether, I mean, they counted you.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
They didn't have calendars.
And I think that the
Yeah,
point of the
180,
age of Abraham and
yeah.
Sarah at this point is
Questionable.
Abraham's faith in spite of the reality of the situation.
He's
Abra-
older.
The Abraham is faithful and believes God's promise, even though it seems absurd. That's the point there. You know, he sets out at 75 at the beginning, and he's 99, right?
Right.
When the promise is made. So, there certainly are probably men who have sired children at 99, right? That's right. I'm sure it's happened. I'm sure it's happened.
But
You
she
know,
was old.
she was old
She
too.
was 90. She
She
was
was
90 and he was
90.
99.
Yeah,
When
not
the child-
physiologically possible.
No.
But they were faithful
Miracles.
nonetheless
But
and
her
believed
It's
it.
a miracle.
Lord.
That's right.
Therefore,
That's right.
she could be given the child.
Trust and faith.
Mhm. But you have this situation with Hagar, and it's a nasty story. It's not a good story. It's one of these stories that seems really abusive, in fact,
It
right?
is.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And so what do we do with it?
Well, the angel came to her and rescued her and said,
Yeah,
we'll take care of you.
that's right. God is faithful in this situation, even when people are less than faithful. And what's the promise that's made to Hagar about Ishmael?
He will have
He will have.
But
children.
he's gonna have
and-
he's gonna have descendants,
Mm-hmm.
many
Mm-hmm.
descendants.
And so here's a historical tidbit. The reference here to the people that he is a nation, the father of a nation, are Arabs.
Mhm.
These are the Arabs. And if we look into other faiths, for instance, Islam, is anyone familiar with this idea that Ishmael in Islam is the patriarch rather than Isaac? And so you have that story. So there's a binding of Ishmael
Yeah.
in Islam and not a binding of Isaac, because they look to him as that figure.
Why?
The historical reason why is because
He was the
Ishmael is
He is the
first-
firstborn
He's the
son.
firstborn of
he's the firstborn,
of Abraham.
and of course the text of the Quran is different than the Bible.
Oh, that's true.
The story is slightly different in the Quran, but historically speaking, the people in that part of the world, the nomadic people, this is a story that explains the existence of like Bedouin people, nomadic herders in the wilderness in that area. And that's what this sort of says, but the theological point for us, right, is that God is faithful even in these situations when humans are less than faithful. God's faithfulness continues. And so this is sort of a little detour in the story of Abraham. There's a few detours. Most of them we cut out, but so we read 15 and 16, and we talked about 17. We've talked about 17 essentially. Okay. I just want to make sure we talk about everything a little bit. 21 we jumped ahead to. I know we skipped over a lot. Hagar and Ishmael depart in 21. And then in and 22 we have in 21 we have the birth of Isaac, right? That's important, right? And that's sort of the fulfillment of part of the covenant, right? Isaac is born, and through Isaac Abraham will be a father of a nation, and that nation will be Israel. People of Israel.
That was the beginning of circumcision, though, wasn't it? With
so
talk a lot about that.
Circumcision is a sign of the covenant,
right?
And if you look back, I can't remember what chapter it was. I didn't talk about it, but Abraham had everyone in his household circumcised, all the males. And in this situation, Isaac is born 17.
And then 8 days later, he's circumcised.
That's right. And Isaac is circumcised, so he enters into the covenant there. So the
Jewish people were never circumcised before this.
There are no Jewish people before that.
Oh, that's true.
This is the beginning.
What
of the
about
Jewish
the
people.
Jewish people today? Do that? They do that. They call it a brisk or something. Don't
Brisk,
they?
yeah.
Right.
And this is why. It's the sign of the covenant.
Okay.
And when we get into the New Testament, there will be debates about whether Christians need to be circumcised. And the debate comes down that they don't. And we could talk about that later. But the circumcision is the sign of the covenant. The covenant is beginning to be fulfilled. So the promised son is given. And so the greatest expectation that they could ever been given is fulfilled. And you cannot probably describe the happiness, right, of Sarah and Abraham at this point, right? The sheer joy of this moment. And then chapter 21, which is one of the most famous stories in the Bible. And it is one of the most tersely written. It could have been written by Ernest Hemingway. The phrasing and it's very terse. Just short declarative sentences. It's really it's actually a masterpiece of literature, I would say. Chapter 22 in Genesis. And so what is the story of Genesis 22?
God tells Abraham to sacrifice Isaac.
Yes.
Yeah.
I gave you a son now. He gave him a son now.
That's right. That's right. And what does Abraham do?
He was going to sacrifice him.
Takes him to the wilderness, right? He brings the wood for the sacrifice and the knives and everything, and makes him carry the wood.
I was gonna say,
Yeah.
And then
where's the
where
isn't that chilling?
what are we sacrificing?
Yeah, that's right. You can see him. And then God will provide
and
that
God will
sacrifice.
provide.
Right. And he gets to Mount Moriah, which is in the wilderness. And what happens? Just as Abraham is taking that knife, that cleaver.
The angels came and stopped him.
That's right. And what do the angels say?
Do not lay a hand on him.
No.
Do not lay a hand on
Lay
the
a
boy.
hand
Blessed
on
him.
the boy.
He blessed Abraham.
Yes. Yeah. Do not reach your hand against the lad, and do nothing to him. For now I know that you fear God and that you have not held back your son.
Foreshadowing of the future.
They find a ram
Yes.
caught in the thicket though.
Yeah.
and they sacrifice
They
it.
sacrificed the ram.
Right.
That's right, God provided.
That's right. God provided.
Mhm.
So, and Mount Moriah, where the sacrifice happens, do you know where that is?
Nope.
What Mount Moriah is?
Over there.
Jerusalem.
It
Turkey?
is in Jerusalem.
Oh, it is.
Jerusalem. It is the Temple Mount of Jerusalem.
Okay.
What became the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, and where today, if you see pictures of Jerusalem, where that Dome of the Rock is, that golden dome.
That's it.
That's at that spot, and underneath that golden dome, it's the Dome of the Rock. What's under the rock? The crest of Mount Moriah, where Abraham bound Isaac and was going to sacrifice him.
Mm.
And that is the spot where the temple sacrifices occurred in when the temple was erected, at that spot.
Wow.
And so, but that's just the historical tidbit. What's the meaning of this story?
Trust in the Lord, because obey him.
Mhm. Did it?
Trust and obey.
Yeah.
Faith. Have faith.
Yeah, because if you don't, terrible things will happen.
You don't know what's going to happen.
Mhm.
You don't
When
wanna
I
find
was
out.
reading it, I just kept thinking that for every time one of them tried to fulfill what God promised in a different way, that there were consequences to what they did.
Mhm.
Not fully, they trusted and revered God, but they didn't fully trust enough to wait.
Mhm.
Well, God's testing us. And instead of
Them.
complaining, we're being tested. We can do one of two things. We can either believe and trust in God, or we can complain about it, as so often people do. And then we always see people
Mhm.
today who have terrible cancer and so forth, and they are completely feel safe. They put their trust in God. It's God's will. What will be will be,
Mhm.
and and they don't complain about it.
Mhm.
And I think that's the faith is what
Mhm.
it's doing. We're being tested.
Mhm. Any other thoughts on this? Anyone kind of made uneasy by this story?
Anyone what?
Made uneasy
Yeah,
by this
it took a
story?
lot of
Yeah.
nerve for him to do that. His beloved son, to sacrifice him is a tremendous leap of faith, to say the least.
I don't know if I could do it.
I don't know that I could either.
No,
If
Now
my
we do
child was
anything to
sacrificed,
protect
I don't know.
our
Mhm.
We haven't been put to the test,
But
but
if it comes,
we're not
we
Abraham.
don't know what God wants.
He's the father
for the child.
of Judaism and of Christianity indirectly.
Oh, no.
I don't know whether our faith is as strong as his was.
Yeah.
He was a very unusual man, though. He was the top of the top as far as faith goes.
And he still struggled, if you think about
That's
it.
right. Yeah, he didn't want to
He did.
Didn't look come easy to him.
So
No,
let's look at it this way. God has made the promise, right?
Mhm.
That through Isaac, he will be a father of nations.
Right.
God makes that promise,
So
and Abraham trusts that promise
Mhm.
even through this demand. That he knows
right.
that even through this demand, that promise will come true regardless.
right.
So it's an absolute trust in the faithfulness of God to fulfill the covenant. Absolute. To the point of doing things that seem to subvert it completely. right? That's the difficulty right there. It's now, did anyone make their way through that web article that I put up? You don't have to about
No.
Kierkegaard, Soren Kierkegaard. Have you anyone
Oh.
heard that name?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Soren
Oh, yeah.
Kierkegaard, right? His most famous book is Fear and Trembling, and it is an analysis of this very story in chapter 22 of Genesis about the binding of Isaac and the faithfulness of Abraham. And the basic argument that Kierkegaard makes, and I won't go through it too much, is that he uses this phrase, and it's a $10 phrase. You might someday get on Jeopardy.
And have the right
win,
answer.
and have the right answer.
Right.
Teleological suspension of the ethical. And basically, the word teleological means, right, the end, the direction of things, right? And so the notion is that when Abraham accepts God's demand, there is a suspension of ordinary morality and ethics because he knows and he trusts 100% in God. It's a one-on-one relationship with God, right? It's not a universal kind of a situation. Ordinarily, you would never in your right mind do anything like this. But because of the exceptional moment and the exceptional encounter between God and Abraham, Abraham decides to suspend morality for a second and follow God's demand, trusting that God will make good of it regardless. And for that, Kierkegaard says that Abraham is a knight of faith. And so this story is a huge motif in the rest of the Bible, right? Who here saw Jesus and God the Father? The church fathers would say that the faithfulness of God is put to the test through Jesus's sacrifice on the cross. He offers his son on the cross as a sacrifice, right? God offers that. And unlike Abraham, it goes to the fullest extent. The son actually suffers and dies. He doesn't pull back. It goes to the fullest. So in that way, Abraham and Isaac are a foreshadowing of the cross. Yeah, and the location of it, right? The church fathers would make a big deal out of that. Same place. The sacrifice on the cross, the binding of Isaac is in the same location.
I have a question about that. If God had promised him that his generation will have thousands of people and countries and kings and whatever, if he kills his son, there's no one to propagate his line.
That's right. He's not going to kill his son.
But does Abraham know that? Because he says, God promised me that my seed will fill in many
trusts
nations.
that it will happen in spite of that command. He
Killing,
knows it will happen.
In spite of killing,
think of the
Isaac.
psychology here. He may relent in his demand. God may relent in his demand.
Yeah.
He may raise Isaac from the dead.
Oh, true.
Right? He can do anything, but he knows and he trusts that God will be faithful, right, even if he
kills his son.
He kills his son. Now, this is not dinner table conversation. You don't have. We're not going to have a VBS binding of Isaac event. but
what
this
about Ishmael? I mean, he would also produce because he is Abram's son, so it's the seed of Abraham.
Yeah.
So he's 13 years older than his brother. And I'm thinking,
but this is the promised son.
Yeah, right, exactly.
He was sort of the.
That was the accidental son.
Yeah. So in my mind, the messiness of these stories sort of lends to the truth of it. No one would would write these stories
No,
to impress anyone, right? They record something of the truth of the situation, and the truth is that even in our messiness, God is faithful, and this is God is faithful through this. And in your booklet, I have the poem by Wilfred Owen, who was a World War I veteran. We won't spend much time talking about it, but I would. It's an interesting way of using the story of Abraham, and it talks about the brutality of war. And he was a poet, one of those poets during the First World War that were, writing in the trenches. Wilfred Owen and who's the other one that comes to mind? Yes, that's right. And the one about the tree.
Joyce Kilmer.
Joyce Kilmer, who
Joyce.
was America's favorite poet for many years, right?
Yeah.
Joyce Kilmer. So there was
that brilliant person speaking that he knows all these
yeah,
various,
absolutely.
I
I'm
know,
impressed.
I'm impressed.
But this poem is pretty interesting. And I also posted on the website Bob Dylan's song, right? Highway 61 revisited. And it goes, something like this. God said to Abraham, kill me a son down on Highway 61.
Yeah.
Right? So, but it's a playful take on the story. It's an important story in our culture and all that. So chapter 22, and then we made a leap to 32. And we skipped over a lot of interesting things. So we Jacob and Esau,
Sorry.
we skipped over
Okay.
a lot of that. They're twins in the womb, right? And they have the idea, and I see Sophia and Oliver doing it sometimes. They kind of fight, and but they I skipped to 32 because then we get into yeah. One. So what do we have happening in 32?
Jacob wants to meet with Esau.
That's right. And what happens?
But he sends his servants ahead of him.
Mm-hmm.
He sent everything he had.
Tells them what to say to him.
This is sort of a West Side Story situation here, isn't it? It's a showdown, right?
But why did he think his brother was?
Why is he so
They're always in struggle. So the
Why is
part we skipped over, they're always in struggle. They are struggling together even from the womb. They're fighting, and they're twins, and they're fighting, and they stole the birth. So 32, we continue this conflict between the two, and we have there's a lot of Bible to get. There's a lot of Bible to read, so I had to be really.
He skipped a few things.
I skipped a few things. Think about sometimes when you watch a movie, you fast forward to the best part.
Yeah.
That's kind of
He's
what we
hitting
have
the
to do.
highlights.
That's what we have to do a little bit, because we want to be able to talk about things too. So in 32, he basically escapes from his brother, right?
He tries to placate
Well, his
him.
brother had said he
He cowers to him.
when
That's
his
right.
father died.
That's
Yeah.
right. So he basically escapes and goes out into the wilderness, right? While this has happened, and what happens in the wilderness, starting in verse 23 or so. And continuing all the way to the end of the chapter.
Jacob sent Esau everything he had, all his animals and his servants and his women. everything
That's right.
to make up to him.
Mhm.
And Esau showed up with 400 men.
Mhm. What happens after that?
Then Jacob had a fight with a man. Now, who is that man? I don't understand that part.
The devil.
Well, he wrestled with
God.
God. He
I
wrestled
think it's
with
God. I think
Is
it's
it
the
the
devil.
God? Is it God or is it the devil?
It's God
Well, he's
or
not
an
fighting
angel, a
with-
representative
an
of
angel,
God.
a heavenly
Okay.
angel.
Right? He wrestles him within the dark until dawn.
Right.
And what happens when let me go for
Dislocated
dawn
his
is
hip.
breaking.
He's
Right.
gonna take your ear out. Muscle.
And then the man says to Jacob, "What is your name?" And he says, "Jacob." And he said, "Not Jacob shall your name hence be, but Israel, for you have striven with God and men and won out." And so here you have Jacob, the son of Isaac, who's the son of Abraham, becoming Israel. And so here's one thing we have to understand about the way things happen in the Old Testament is that the names of nations go back to the name of their founding member.
So the Israelites.
So this is in microcosm, this is all of Israel, because this is the father of Israel, the people Israel, who will be the subject matter for the rest of this book. Right here. From then on, the whole book is about Israel. So when you talk about the Jewish people and whatnot, here it is. This is where it begins.
Wow.
For you have striven with God and man. And so what do you make of that? About the people of Israel struggling with God and man?
Well, still going on today.
Yeah, they're still fighting. Everybody.
Just turn on the news.
But knowing what you know about the story of the Bible, let's bracket out the modern day state of Israel completely. Let's not even talk about that, because it has nothing to do with any of it. So given what we know about the Bible, striven with God and man, what meaning do you reckon in this?
Jesus.
Sure, because Jesus is a child of Israel. Jesus is a descendant of Isaac and Jacob.
And then Abraham too, right?
That's right.
Well, what time in history was this? How many thousands of years before Christ was born does this statistically take place?
2000.
No.
More than that?
More than that.
No, we're talking Exodus is 5,000 years before.
Really?
When Christ was
That
born?
long?
Yeah, but this text that we're reading, it might be even more than that. But the text that we're reading right now
Right.
is between, okay, drum roll, 5 and 10,000.
Oh my gosh. 2 years before
About 5,000 BC. And what books, other books were written about 5,000 BC? Let's say the Old Testament mostly it's at least the 5 books of Moses came to its current form about 5,000 years ago. 5,000 years before Christ. What books were being written?
I don't know.
Not many.
Not many.
Well, there were books.
I mean, there were
The Homeric epics.
What?
Oh,
Homer?
of course.
Homer.
The Iliad.
Mhm.
yeah.
Iliad?
The Vedic scriptures in India. So this was a time of actually some of the let's say the earliest ancient texts were coming into being around this time across the world, right? And this is the beginning of civilization. These books were written, But this is talking about the way back primeval times, before before we really have historical records. These are the patriarch. Genesis is concerned with prehistory in a sense. So 32 and 33. So you have 32, the naming of Israel, which will be important for us, and then 33. What
Can I
happens
ask
in
a question?
Yes.
A quick question. It says that Jews even today don't eat the meat from the hip.
Yes.
What is that?
I actually don't know if that's actually true today, but you have these what they call etiologies in the Bible over and over again. An etiology is a story of explanation why things are the way they are. So every once in a while you'll have an aside. Well, that's why they don't eat that part of the an animal's body because of this story, right?
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah, and it would be very interesting for someone who actually practiced that. Oh, that's why we don't do that. When they hear it, and that's you hear this over and over again in the Bible. It sort of kind of makes us pause and question things a little bit. But for the original audience of these books, it would have been really interesting. Like, oh yeah, that's exactly why we don't eat that part of the hip.
Okay.
Tendons. Yeah.
Thank you.
Which is unfortunate because tendon meat is really delicious if it's cooked really, really correctly, braised, and you can have they weren't eating Vietnamese pho over there.
No, no.
But so 32, and what happens in 33?
They made up. Esau and
Mother.
Jacob.
They make up, and Rachel dies, right? Is that correct?
Rachel died. Right.
I believe so, yes.
Yes, Rachel dies. And it has another etiology. And that's why the tomb is there in Bethlehem. And in fact, today it is still in Bethlehem, the tomb of Rachel.
Really?
And so 35 is important in a certain way.
35.
Yep. You have
God officially names Jacob as Israel.
That's right. Rise up and go to Bethel and dwell there and make an altar there to God who appeared to you when you fled from Esau, your brother. So, so that would be the spot where he strove with God. It becomes Bethel. And what does Bethel mean in Hebrew? House of God. And so over and over again, you will have different places that will become centers of worship, with Jerusalem eventually being the number one place of worship. But this is the first sort of sanctuary of God, is Bethel. Permanent. It's not just, God sort of just appears wherever God will. But as time goes on, God will be centered in these places of worship. And this is the first sort of temple, if you will, at Bethel. And that's where Jacob is buried, right?
No, Isaac.
Isaac is buried,
Isaac
yes.
buried. Jacob and Esau buried him. He was 180.
180. And they gave Jacob all the alien gods that were in their hands and the rings that were in their ears, and Jacob buried them under the terebinth that is by Shechem. And that's where in the land of Canaan, he and all the people who were with him, and he built there an altar, and he called the place El Bethel, for there God was revealed to him when he fled from his brother. And then you have a restatement of the covenant in chapter 11, at verse 11, He called his name Israel. That is already happened, but this is sort of a restatement. And God said to him, I'm El Shaddai. This is maybe the first time we've heard this name of God. Be fruitful and multiply. A nation, an assembly of nations shall stem from you, and kings shall come forth from your loins. So you have a renewal of the covenant that's been made with Abraham, with Isaac, and now Jacob, Israel. And the land that I gave to Abraham and Isaac, to you I will give it, and to your seed after you I will give the land. And God ascended from him the place where he had spoken with him. And Jacob set up a pillar in the place where he had spoken with him, a pillar of stone. And he offered a libation upon it. He poured wine out and poured oil on it. And Jacob called the name of the place where God had spoken with him Bethel, house of God.
Was this in Canaan? Is this where this happened?
Yeah. Any thoughts about this concludes the story of Abraham that we began in earnest this evening. The promise has been made. The promise is beginning to be fulfilled, and we're sort of zooming in on the people of Israel now.
The thing is, they had so many wives and so many concubines or whatever. I mean, weren't there other men there that going to have families, or was it just the very wealthy that was why that happened? Because the other men maybe were servants. I don't know. You hear about the men that were in power had many, many wives and concubines and probably hundreds
and
of
they're
children.
listing out
But, I mean,
listing out the
where are
wives and the sons.
where are the other men in the country? And I mean, I'm just wondering, is it because they're wealthy and they're the only ones that can afford a harem, I guess you could say? I don't know. I'm guessing.
The society was set up in a much different way than it is now.
Obviously,
we don't have nuclear families. We don't a household. When you hear the word household, you're talking about a broader group of people.
Obviously,
You're talking about a whole retinue of wives and kids and servants and all of that. So almost like a commune, but they were mostly up until this point nomadic. They were, and so you could almost think of this as a tribe or a clan or something like that. And at the center of it was this patriarch,
right?
Who was a father to all of them and cared for them as a patriarch to those people that was under his care. So it's more of a king or a prince over people than a father in the sense that we understand that word.
Right.
There's a different, and as time goes on, the even within the Bible, the paradigm completely shifts of how families are organized and things like that. But especially in this time period, it's a nomadic lifestyle, and they're following their herds and things like that. So the land of Canaan and the Middle East at this time was very lush and green. I don't know if this may be hard to imagine. Plains, and it's still today, actually. Sometimes in our minds we think it's all desert. Very little of it is actually desert. But it's all very lush and green and hillscapes. At this time, in the time of the Old Testament, it was more akin to what you think of the African savanna. There were lions and
You're beeping.
There were lions and jackals and antelopes and things like that in the countryside there. It is not as it is today. So they were traveling in this sort of this pasture land, and I don't know how to describe it, but think of these people as nomads living in the wilderness, in the African savanna, because that's essentially what it is.
Well, what is Canaan today, and what part of the Middle East is it today?
It's Israel, Palestine.
Palestine. Okay.
Take a look. If you ever want a Bible that's a decent translation, and also has a lot of charts and graphs and maps and illustrations and things like that, this ESV Study Bible is pretty good.
The Bible. I said it looks like a pretty big.
It's a pretty big Bible. Yeah.
What is what does ESV mean? Version.
English Standard Version.
Ah, thank you.
No,
We
Canaan,
translated
Canaan.
from
Canaan.
5,000 years
Canaan.
ago to today. What country? You know, we may not know. As I said, I didn't know where Canaan was, and today because it's not Canaan now. It's called Jerusalem. That's what I wanted to know.
So this is a map. Okay.
I have mine.
Yeah. So
Well, mine does,
Right.
yeah.
so here you have the Jordan River. Okay. You see it?
I think they're different versions.
Jordan River.
I have to
So
check
right here
that
is your
as well.
favorite, your famous Sea of Galilee. That's in the north, right? See it? And then the Dead Sea down at the bottom, and in between, you have the River Jordan, right? Okay. When the Bible speaks of Canaan, it is what's west of the River Jordan. So Moses doesn't cross into the Promised Land. He stands, on the
Right.
mountain and looks into the land of Jordan, right? The land of Canaan. That's Canaan is west of the River Jordan to the sea. From the mountains to the river to the sea.
And that's now Jerusalem.
Jerusalem is where is it? It's not on this map because this is pre-Jerusalem.
Oh.
Okay, let's get a map that has Jerusalem.
Would be
I
Palestine.
want to know where it is today.
It's over there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's over there somewhere.
Over there.
Okay.
Why they're fighting?
There it is. It's in the south.
Southern part of Jerusalem.
There's Jerusalem, right there. There's your. So, an interesting fact about Jerusalem is that it is literally on the top of a mountain, essentially. I can't remember what the.
Have you been there?
Mhm. So you always hear in the Bible they're going up to Jerusalem, and they literally are because
Gotta
Yeah.
go up that mountain.
you got to. Well, if you're going from the Dead Sea to Jerusalem, you are going from the lowest part on planet Earth
Right.
to a literal mountain, a couple of thousand feet above sea level anyway. So you're talking about the very bottom of the planet all the way up to what would be a mountain even at sea level.
Mm.
And it just so it's in Jerusalem, it's lush and green and pasture land. It's that, it's a mountain, right? So that's, and then as you go south, it's all desert.
Mm.
And Galilee is also very far below sea level as well. So from all directions you're going up. And
What is that mountain that's up there in Jerusalem? What is that? Mount Sinai?
Sinai is in Egypt.
Oh, in Egypt.
Yeah.
Well, what's up there? What's up in Jerusalem?
When you're in Jerusalem, you wouldn't reckon the things that are called mountains in the
Oh.
Bible as mountains.
They're
A
hills.
slight elevation within the city.
Okay.
But you're talking about Mount Zion, maybe
I don't know.
Mount of Olives.
Mount of Olives.
Mount of Olives. Yeah.
That's what's in that.
Yeah,
part of Jerusalem.
Yeah, just like when you're in Jerusalem, right? Mount of Olives. Oh, that's a slight
A
incline.
slight incline up there.
It's a pretty
Right.
decent incline. Your legs are going to be
It's not
tired.
really a mountain.
No,
What we
mountain.
consider a mountain.
No.
No,
A hill,
Hill,
a tall hill.
large hill.
an incline.
But it's all relative to where you're looking from too.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Is the Dead Sea, what's it called? Salt Sea?
It is a salt sea, yeah.
Nothing lives in it, is that true?
Some things live in it, but it's so alkaline that
Not much.
not much lives in it.
Yeah.
And you have been in it, and you can't really swim in it. You just sort of you bob a little bit.
Lay there.
Yeah. You don't want to ever get it on in your eyes or in your mouth
No,
because
no.
it will burn.
Did you get in there?
Yeah.
What, was it cool or was it warm?
I'll tell you, in Jerusalem, I was in Jerusalem the same day that I went to the Dead Sea, because it's only like an hour trip or something like that. I was wearing sweaters and jackets in Jerusalem. This was in February. I can't remember.
It depends when you're there.
Yeah. It was cold in Jerusalem. It was almost wintry weather. You go to the Dead Sea. It's
And
90 degrees, and it's only an hour away.
Really?
It's very odd. No,
No, we didn't need that.
you have to wear your shorts. Yeah.
That's a very
But
odd.
it's
That's
desert.
a very odd change too to think of.
Wow.
It's like Arizona.
An hour from meeting,
Right?
Because
Yeah.
because it was cold in Jerusalem
Oh.
through 90 degrees.
To being swimming in the Dead Sea.
it's very weird.
You can't really swim in it.
Floating in the Dead Sea.
Floating in the
Getting
Dead Sea,
in
yeah.
the Dead Sea.
Oh, so this is so the state of Connecticut is roughly the same size as the state of Israel.
Okay.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
So that's how big that area is. It's not big at all.
No,
Like
Texas.
yeah,
Yeah, not
Right.
like Texas.
not Texas.
The whole
So
whole
when you're
country,
hearing the
too.
news about Gaza Strip and all that,
Right.
think
Small.
about like between such and such street in New York City, rather than a whole big area. We're talking very small,
Yeah.
because the whole area is any larger than Connecticut.
Okay.
Mm.
But you have a Mediterranean climate there. You have deserts. You have alpine environment with
So you have a
snow
lot of
year round
Mm.
in this little area. It's very strange. It's like a microcosm of planet Earth. When I was there, you go out in the countryside and they're growing bananas.
Mm.
And you wouldn't think that would be growing there, but it is.
Hmm.
So it's so this whole book is concerned with a very small little place.
Yes.
We read Romans and Hebrews, and I think it's important for us, especially to look at Hebrews 11 just for a second here. And we don't need to talk about it too much, but what I'd like you to do is bookmark that in your Bible, because here you have, in a real sense, in Hebrews 11. Okay. A summary of the Old Testament,
Right.
from a Christian perspective,
It's like the summary
Hmm.
of everything that we've talked about.
and everything we will talk about.
Yeah.
But from the Christian perspective,
From a
in
different
that-
perspective.
from the
from a different
perspective
lens.
that all things have been fulfilled in Christ. And this is chapter 11, Hebrews. And why do you think that is in this particular book, Hebrews? Who is the book of Hebrews written for? It's addressed to the Hebrews.
It's for the Hebrews.
It's for the Hebrews. So so it goes line by line, chapter 11 in Hebrews, about the Old Testament, about the faithfulness of God and the faithfulness, well, sometimes faithfulness of man.
Sometimes.
But it talks particularly about Abraham's faith, and that's sort of the center of that. And Romans 4 is about Abraham's faith, about how it wasn't through Abraham's righteousness that he was justified, but it was through his faith, because he trusted the promises of God. And that's the center of the Old Testament, is that God is faithful, and we are called to be faithful in response. That's what the covenant is.
Well, isn't Hebrews also written for Christians? faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen.
That's correct. That's correct. But at the time, there are two communities of Christians. When this book is written, right?
Right.
There are Gentile Christians who are becoming the majority, and there are Jewish Christians. And at this time, there were those two groups, and this book is specifically addressed to the Jewish Christians, to the Hebrew Christians, because Christianity, of course, originates within the Jewish community and then broadens out, especially through the work of Paul to the Gentiles. We'll talk about that as time goes on, but we're really concerned with that Jewish story right now.
Okay.
Any thoughts before we end for the evening? Hope you're all enjoying it.
Very much.
Good.
Father
but
David, you had 7 more online tonight.
Oh,
Just
that's
so you
great.
know.
So that's 1, 2, 3,
They're
Nine.
9. Oh,
16.
16. So
Yeah. That's great.
perfect. Well, that's wonderful. Well, we'll gather again next week, and we'll see each other probably on Sunday in between. Okay.
That's good.
All of us will see each other on Thursday night for vestry.
Yes, some of us will.
Come on, you.
Good night. I'm gonna stop the program here.
Okay, good night.
Good night.